Hello and welcome to another edition of Blind Eye Live. I am your host, Blind Eye himself, Hunter King, owner and founder, proprietor, all the titles of Blind Eye Media, a small internet media group you've never heard of. That might have been the least energetic version of that intro I've ever done, but that's fun. I might have messed up my voice a little yesterday, so I'm trying to be a little chill. I think it sounds much better than it did last night. And other people might not hear a difference. I'm feel it a little, but it's all good. So today's show, I'm starting a little early. It's 2:43 Central Time, and I've got to be out of here a little earlier today, so I wanted to make sure I'm going to try and wrap up the show around 4. Hopefully that happens. We'll see. But I've only got 2 things on the docket, really. Next week, I'm probably going to start really digging into doing, or get back into doing some kind of news segments, what have you. But I'm still trying to get into the thick of things. And now that franchise tag windows have opened up for the NFL, this is the official start of the NFL offseason. There will be some extensions, I'm sure, that will be announced as well during this period of time, because if you are under contract, I'm pretty sure if you're under contract with a team, you can negotiate an extension at any time with your incumbent team, I believe. I don't think there's any moratorium on that. It's just with new teams. Now, I might be wrong, but I believe during the franchise tag window that can happen, which that goes until March 3rd? March 8th. I think it's March 3rd. So, and there are going to be some interesting decisions that have to be made in regards to the franchise tag window for certain teams. It's going to be interesting with Green Bay, because regardless of whether Aaron Rodgers is there or not, I'm not letting Davante Adams go anywhere. Unless I'm wanting to full-on rebuild or just really cut costs for this year, focus on developing some young talent and starting some kind of rebuild. But, I mean, they're so close. But you might put a lot of that on Aaron Rodgers' shoulders for how good he has been. People can drag his playoff performances all they want. It's a team sport. And there are a ton of elite quarterbacks who never won a Super Bowl, let alone won multiple. Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. Dan Fouts never won a Super Bowl. Tony Romo never played in a Super Bowl. And if you want to say that Tony Romo was not a great quarterback, you don't watch enough football, or you're just choosing to be part of this entirely overly negative culture where apparently there can only be one awesome player at a position, and then everyone else is just crap tier. Don't bother playing. It's ridiculous. It is. I mean, part of it's Twitter. Twitter's part of the fault for that, but it's also like just the media apparatus in general. And it's really frustrating for anybody with any smidgen of, well, as far as I'm concerned, any smidgen of actual personal character. Because the hot take artists I see or in sports media, or just the people I see in the media in general outside of sports too, it's like there is no moral character left in mainstream media. It's none. It's all for political and personal gain. And those things do not have anything to do with morals. Politics has... Political gain is not the same as moral... is not the same as moral gain. You can have morally right politics, but they will cost you at times. You'll have to sacrifice for your stands. And hopefully you'll have enough people respect that they join you. But, off of that soapbox and back onto the franchise tag stuff. I think the Packers would be crazy to let Devontae Adams walk regardless. But they've got to make a decision this offseason too. If Rodgers is out the door, and I believe wholeheartedly he's out, you trade him for what you can get. Maybe you flip him to a team that has a young quarterback they're willing to part with. If I'm Green Bay, I'm running down the street to Miami. I say down the street. I'm giving Miami a call, though. Now, they seem to believe in Tua, but Brian Flores didn't. And honestly, with the Dolphins roster, I think if you add Aaron Rodgers there, they're going to compete to win the AFC East, period. Otherwise, I'd call down to Green Bay and look into Justin Fields. I wasn't as in love with Justin Fields as a lot of other people. I believe there was a lot of work to be done there, but the tools are immense. He could look really good in Green Bay under Matt LaFleur. My thing with Rodgers leaving is like how many places are you really going to be? Are you really going to have as good a shot as where you're at with a great coaching staff who he likes, by the way? From all accounts, he really likes LaFleur. He likes his coaches. Denver, I think Denver hiring Hackett, there's some people who've criticized that hire, or some people are using this as like, there's some people who every coach hired this offseason was a proof of racism, somehow including Lovie Smith. But the Broncos hiring Hackett, in my opinion, was because they want Rodgers. I think the Broncos want Rodgers bad. Which I guess this goes into the storylines. The Packers are going to be one of the most prominent teams this offseason, regardless. There's going to be tons of rumors surrounding Denver because of their quarterback situation and will they or won't they trade for, any number of players. Philly's going to be prominent storyline-wise this offseason. They've got 3 first-round picks this year in the span of I think it's 15, 16, and 19. Which in this draft I think is actually a really nice sweet spot. Because depending on what decisions happen ahead of them, and if teams try to move up for QBs, Carolina and Washington need to figure out their QB situations. I'm sorry, I like Taylor Heineke a lot, or Heineke a lot, but he's a high-end backup. That's what he is. He's athletic, he's mobile, but he's not a dynamic athlete at the position. And he doesn't have the tools as a passer where you're sitting here like, this combination gives us... if you had maybe the best roster in the NFL, maybe he could get you to a Super Bowl. And I really like Washington's roster. I don't know what happened at times with their defense last year. That was troubling. The talent's there, though. Like that Cowboys game, I don't know what happened, but they need a quarterback in that locker room that can lead, and get players to believe. Players believed in Alex Smith. Players rally around Alex Smith because of his story and other things. From all accounts, Jimmy Garoppolo is that kind of guy. And the 49ers are not going to be able to turn this team over to Trey Lance as long as Jimmy G's there. Because the team believes him. Team loves him. Players love him. You put that guy in Washington, they're probably the favorites, or I say favorites. They're going to be contending for the top of the NFC East. I believe. Is Jimmy G, would I take him over Dak Prescott? No. But they have a lot of talent there. And Ron Rivera is a good coach. And I talked some smack a little bit last year about, when Alex Smith was talking about how, no one, or they didn't want to give him a shot. They didn't want to give him a shot. I get it. I think it's kind of crappy, considering Ron Rivera was battling cancer, so he can battle cancer and coach, but, this guy can't rehab like crazy from a brutal injury and get back to a spot where he can, he believes he can give it a go, and you won't. Because you don't want to be the guy that lets him get hurt. I'm sorry. Alex Smith has the ability to retire. I don't think if he's the best guy, or if he's capable, and they needed quarterbacks, like they needed a quarterback, and Alex Smith wasn't great, but he didn't make big mistakes. So Washington needs a quarterback. They're either going to draft one, or they're going to acquire a veteran. My money's on Jimmy G right now, going to Washington. That's where my money is. Which, I mean, the quarterbacks are going to be a huge thing. I talked about it Tuesday. Pittsburgh, their quarterback situation, that's going to be a big deal. I think they're going to draft one. I think they're going young. They've got, and then across the state you have Philadelphia. It seems like they're going to give Jalen Hurts another run. I think Jalen Hurts has reached his ceiling as a passer. I don't think he's going to get much better. I don't. Like, as far as I'm concerned, Philadelphia would be better served to turn the ball over to, or turn it over to like Tyrod Taylor, than have Jalen Hurts as their quarterback. Hurts is a little bit younger, and maybe at this stage maybe a little bit quicker, but he's really, for a playmaking quarterback who's a first reader run quarterback, he's not as dynamic agility-wise as a lot of those players. Like, I'd argue Tyrod Taylor is probably still more agile and maybe faster than Jalen Hurts. I'd rather take a shot at Huntley, the backup for the Ravens. You want to talk about a organization that over the last 2 decades has, or say 2 decades, let's say since they drafted Flacco. Well, actually, the year before, when they drafted Troy Smith. Troy Smith looked pretty good as a rookie. And then, unfortunately, he got sick and didn't get a chance to, battle Joe Flacco. But Flacco worked out for them. And Flacco's been kind of, especially the last 5 years or so, or since they won the Super Bowl, his values declined every year. But they got a really good, 7 or so years out of Flacco. 8. I might be underestimating. And won a Super Bowl, in which he had arguably the greatest postseason stretch of quarterback play in NFL history. One of the greatest postseasons in NFL history. That's good QB evaluation. They they correct, and heck, even before that, they correctly surmised that Steve McNair still had some good years left when the Titans decided to move on from him and upon drafting Vince Young. Kyle Bowler didn't work out. That happens. But other than that, like, they've been really good at not only finding quarterbacks and developing them to certain degrees, because beyond Troy Smith, who, and he didn't last super long as a backup because there weren't a lot of teams at that time in the mid-2000s that were willing to take chances on quarterbacks that small. Heck, even when Tyrod was drafted. Tyrod's been really good. And it's not like he's a short QB, but he's not a prototypical QB. But he's been really, really good. Trace McSorley wasn't awful. He wasn't amazing, but he's not the worst backup quarterback I've seen thrust into action. When he spelled Lamar Jackson at times. I don't know where he's at right now. I think he was on their practice squad last year because Huntley beat him out, and Huntley looks better for sure. And I didn't think Trace McSorley was a long-term quarterback prospect in the NFL. Just not at all. Not even really as a backup. I didn't see him lasting as a backup either. Because he didn't have any of the projectables to me to be a long-term starter or a long-term backup. Because to be honest, considering some of the stuff he did in college, I felt like he underachieved in college. So, especially in certain, important games, I feel like he was the one who didn't rise to the occasion. But look at Lamar Jackson. They traded back up into the end of the first round, and they took a chance on Lamar. Lamar Jackson was my number 2 QB. And he was my highest ceiling QB. Maybe I should have had Josh Allen as my highest ceiling QB. He was my number 2 in that regard. See, I feel like I'm crooked in the camera. Is this like... That looks better. I think my camera was... Man, I hate... The one thing I don't like about this camera is it's like... It's a little wonky getting it set up right. So, anyway, we've got... I got off on the weeds on the Ravens there, but their backup, it's like they've done a really good job of producing backup quarterbacks who've moved on from being backups or have been, they've stuck around the league. So a guy like Tyler Huntley, I don't think anyone's going to trade for him. And I don't know if the Ravens would trade him unless someone gave him some ridiculous, overpay offer. But I'd rather roll with him as my starter going in the year than Jalen Hurts. And I like Jalen Hurts. I'd love to see him do better. I'd love to see him improve. He seems like a great character guy. Like, how he handled the whole situation in Alabama was just top-notch, phenomenal. For real, hats off to him how he handled that. Far more professionally than so many professional athletes handle things. Heck, 40, 50, 60-year-old people, don't handle situations of less controversy or less whatever than that. You got to hand it to him with his maturity and how he handled that. But from there, talked about Pittsburgh, Philly, potentially. Because Philly could also trade for one of the top quarterbacks, and they could use Hurts in one of those deals potentially. Said Washington. I think the Giants are all in on, especially hiring Brian Daboll. They want Daniel Jones to succeed, and if I'm being fair, Daniel Jones has had terrible offensive lines for most of his time in New York. Tons of injuries to his top weapons, especially Saquon Barkley, and Barkley didn't look fully back yet last year at any point that I was watching, or before I just lost interest in paying attention to the Giants at all. That receiving room, Kenny Golladay, you've got Kadarius Toney. We'll see what their tight end room looks like. Because it seems like Evan Ingram's out, gone. I don't know about Sterling Shepard or Darius Slayton. I think one of them at least is a free agent. I would try and retain one of them. I'd try and retain Slayton. I think Slayton is the perfect perimeter, number 2 to be across from Kenny Golladay and let Toney play in the slot. I think you let Shepard, as trusty as Shepard can be, I mean, unless you've got the budget for all 4, and with the way Daboll calls things, you could have all 4 of those guys, but I think someone's going to be unhappy. I'd maybe think of drafting another young receiver sometime to be kind of like your number 4 option. To kind of develop, like the Bills have developed Gabriel Davis, which actually would follow the way the Giants developed Darius Slayton, although Darius Slayton popped pretty early. But he was one of those high upside guys that, no, we're not talking a superstar, but we're talking about a guy who can be in a simple route tree of hitch, slants, and deep routes. Slayton has he's for a guy with his length, he's got really good initial quickness. He's got some wiggle to him, but he also has great long speed. Like, his build-up speed is immense. And so on those deeper routes, or, if you get him in some of these quick game actions or off screens and you get him moving, he can, because of his long-term acceleration, he can wreck angles that defenders have already plotted out. Like, he can beat angles in a lot of scenarios. So I think he just gives you something dynamic that, like, Sterling Shepard doesn't. But that depends on what you want. If you're going to pick one of the two, and I would imagine Slayton would be cheaper, even though I think he's the more impactful. Is he as consistent? No. But I think he offers more, like, big play impact. But then again, I guess if you're wanting that from Golladay and potentially maybe you value a guy like Shepard, but I feel like you can find guys like Shepard cheaper than what Shepard would go for. I can't remember. I'd need to pull up, like, Spotrac or Over the Cap to look at some contracts there. The Giants are going to be interesting. I don't think they're going to be in the quarterback market. Obviously, all the teams that have drafted, like, young quarterbacks the last couple years, they're out. Arizona's interesting right now because it seems like Kyler Murray's a piece of crap teammate, which, where have I seen that before? People talk about Kevin Sumlin, like, botching, and not that Kevin Sumlin doesn't deserve some blame for how things for him ended at A&M, but it seems like Kyle Allen was a better teammate, and there's a reason why Kyler Murray transferred out, but there was also a reason why Kyle Allen transferred out. Because I think to everyone it was obvious that Allen was the better teammate and the guy that people wanted to play for at A&M, and that Kyler Murray and his father were a problem. You know, Kyler Murray is a great player. Like, he has incredible tools, but the attitude that I'm hearing, I'm not shocked by because I saw it out of his father in all of the interviews his father has had. If you watch the whole Heisman Trophy thing from 2018 with him and Tua, was it 20? Yeah, it was 2018 with him and Tua and Dwayne Haskins. The vibe, like his dad gave off the most condescending, arrogant vibe. And while that doesn't necessarily always mean that the kid's that way, I feel like I'm a pretty good reflection of my father in a lot of respects. Like, I try to be, I'm not the exact same person, but the way I treat people, my demeanor with people, and how I interact and deal with people, I get from him. And his dad came across really proud, really arrogant during that whole process, and in other things that I'd seen even before then. So his dad carries himself like he's some, you know, or like he's great, like he's some borderline, like he's some legend. I don't know I didn't know who he was except for his son. So I don't know, but it's kind of interesting how, and I'm not going to necessarily say that Kyler having some issues in Arizona with the way certain things are being done wouldn't shock me. That ownership group has been scattershot in its decision making over the years, and to some degree, you could argue got lucky. With Kurt Warner and Carson Palmer having, you know, late career second star arcs, or like, you know, like comeback arcs, and getting kind of lucky with coaching hires, or in terms of Wisenhunt getting more than what Wisenhunt's given anywhere else, basically, maybe because of Kurt Warner. And then for Arians, getting maybe the best stretch of Arians' career. And I say that even knowing that Arians has won a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. But, you know, I think if the owner did decide to not give playoff bonuses to the coaches, that's kind of stupid. But I think Kyler's issues stem beyond, or may not even have anything to do with that. And there are a lot of really great professional players around that Cardinals team. And if the rumors are that they don't vibe with him, that's a Kyler Murray problem. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on with Arizona. It'd be kind of interesting to see if Arizona pulled this. Now, I've not heard anyone talk about this yet, to my knowledge. What if Arizona flipped Kyler Murray for Deshaun Watson? Because if I'm Houston, I'm not getting anything from Watson. Now, yes, it's another disgruntled guy, but maybe getting him back in his home state, telling him everything he wants to hear, although maybe that might not be the best thing, but who knows? you get rid of Watson, you get Murray. And it'd be interesting to see which team would be having to part with potential assets in that deal. Because you could argue one way that Murray's still on a rookie contract, so Arizona's having to take on money. Maybe you'd have to send them picks. Heck, Arizona might have to send some player contracts, which might necessitate the Texans sending picks as well. Texans could also flip the other way. It's like, yeah, but our guys actually won playoff games. I think they've won a playoff game, at least a playoff game with Deshaun Watson. I know that Watson has a longer track record of success, but he also didn't play this last year. And for the most part, guys who miss seasons without, with it not having anything to do with injuries and like having to rehab. And Watson's a little different situation, but Le'Veon Bell sat out a full season, and look at what happened to his career. And Bell was still young enough to where, you could argue it's like, yeah, but it's like this guy's still like in his 20s, like he's still like a year and a half. I think he was like a year and a half from 30 or 2 years from 30. I think he was like 28. You'd think that Le'Veon was still in, very much in his prime. And a year off, taking a year off, you'd think would maybe put a little bit of tread back on his tires. But you might also then flip around and argue like Antonio Brown, because he did kind of not really play a whole lot for a year. And then he came back and was pretty good for the Buccaneers when he was finally allowed to play for them. Helped them win the Super Bowl. And then he was playing pretty well this year before he lost his mind again. I'm gonna say Antonio Brown is already having onset of CTE. Just to get on that. Some other big offseason storylines. I basically have kind of touched on every team in the NFC East at this point. Let's see. I talked about the Packers. The Bears. Bears are being interesting. They're rebuilding. I don't think they should trade for Rodgers. Like, there's been some people who've talked about that. Just stick with Fields and see if you can develop him, because I don't think the Bears right now have the roster to contend even with Rodgers on the team. They have some talent on defense, absolutely, at every level of the defense. But that offensive line is still... James Daniels really hasn't developed yet, necessarily. I think Tevin Jenkins is the guy for them, or is one of their tackles moving forward. Still think they need to find the other one, personally. But they're also at a transition period. Like, I think Allen Robinson's gone. Is Mooney a number one guy, or do you need to draft another guy? I mean, they need to draft a receiver regardless. But, they botched developing Anthony Miller, who's like really good, and for a period of time looked, like he was developing. Matt Nagy and that coaching staff, they brought in, there were so many offensive guys over like the last half decade that came into Chicago that I just don't understand how they messed them up. Like, Adam Sheehan, to me, was like, he was a lower school guy, but he was one of my favorite mid-round prospects in recent memory. Tight end. He had everything you wanted. Maybe it wasn't like super fast, but to me, he looked like a guy who could be like, he looked like he could be the next Jason Witten. And that didn't work out. I think Cole Kmet would be further down his development track if, Nagy wasn't there. and if they had a different staff already. And there was another receiver that they drafted that, not Kevin White, like since then, which it's crazy to think Kevin White's been like 7 years ago now, maybe 8, but I'm thinking 7 at this point, which is like time flies. Which, man, how about all those West Virginia receivers that never panned out? Let's see. Detroit's going to be interesting. They're another team. I didn't even mention them in the quarterback thing I talked about Tuesday. I totally blanked. They don't have to do anything. But Goff is not their long-term answer, but they're still in rebuild mode. If they're not in love with anybody, they shouldn't take anybody in the first round. They definitely shouldn't, like, at the top. Now, in the back end of the first round, that's interesting. I'm in love with Sam Howell, so anybody in the back of the first round who wants to take a swing at Howell, I'm all for it. But I feel like Detroit, the thing is, like, it's unfortunate Detroit's where they are right now this year because of the quarterback class. There isn't like a surefire guy. Like, no one's surefire. But I mean, you're talking about a prospect where it's like you've got to take the plunge on if you have the opportunity. There is no. I mean, none of these quarterbacks in this draft do I have graded as high as Mac Jones. Mac Jones would go number 1 overall this year, I'd argue. Well, by my rankings, he would. And that's without considering his rookie season. Like, just by my draft grades alone. I had 5 quarterbacks. I mean, I had all 5 of those quarterbacks that got drafted last year. You know, they'd easily be the number 1 pick this year. I think if you were a quarterback if you're a quarterback desperate team. Now the Jaguars obviously wouldn't take Mac Jones because they just took Trevor Lawrence. But Houston, I think, would consider Mac Jones, and maybe I'm wrong. I was higher on Mac Jones than a lot of evaluators, and that's fine. But I think you'd be hard pressed to say that if Mac Jones wasn't in this quarterback class, people would be hyping him up. Because if he had, if he had been Alabama's starting quarterback this year, again, he probably would have put up similar numbers to Bryce Young. He probably would have put up similar numbers to what he did the year before, when he, was somehow 3rd in Heisman Trophy voting behind Trevor Lawrence, even though he was clearly better than Trevor Lawrence. I'm sorry, like, the Heisman's not like a career achievement award. It's a seasonal achievement award. And if Devontae Smith wasn't winning, and he deserved to win, in my opinion, Mac Jones was... I mean, to me, the 3 best players in college football were on that Alabama team. Najee Harris was my number 3 behind Mac Jones. So if that tells you anything. It's just like... so, I don't know. If I'm Detroit, though... if the Jaguars do not pick do not pick Aiden Hutchinson, I'm running to the podium for Aiden Hutchinson. It just fits. He fits the area. I mean, he's from the University of Michigan. Like, it just fits like a glove. And Hutchinson is my number 1. He's my number 1 prospect. I think the Jaguars should go with Evan Neal. The new coaching staff needs to try and develop K'Lavon Chaisson. As far as I'm concerned, that's what they need to do. Or take a edge rusher later, because I think there's going to be some interest, or there are a lot of interesting names in the 2nd, 3rd round range. But you've got Josh Allen. I would focus on making sure Trevor Lawrence is upright, because they need to let Cam Robinson walk, period. And I think, you draft Neal, you put him at left tackle, you let Walker Little and Jawan Taylor fight it out. Or heck, if Walker Little's really good and you decide he's your best tackle and you put him at left tackle, then Neal becomes your right tackle and you kick Jawan Taylor to like inside to guard maybe. Because I think as well, I think AJ Cann is a free agent. And Taylor's just a mauler in the run game. And I think he'll fit. I think he'll transition pretty well to guard. You've got Brandon Linder, who when he's healthy is one of the best centers in the league. But like I said, I think it's going to be interesting because what Jacksonville does with the first pick is going to be really telling. And to be honest, if I'm Jacksonville, I also really like. I'm really high on Aquanu out of NC State. There's some people who have him graded ahead of Evan Neal, which in a way is mind-blowing, but Aquanu is mean. He doesn't have like Neal's physical tools, and some people believe he's more of a guard than a tackle prospect. I'm not of that opinion, but I think if he ended up playing guard as his main position, well, I think he's a guaranteed stud at guard, should I say. But I think he could play left tackle, absolutely, and be really good. But if you put him at guard, he's going to be right there with Quentin Nelson and Zach Martin and Joe Batonio on the interior. Like, he's going to step in and be just a dog. So if Jacksonville could, say, trade down with someone who really wanted to, like, move up for Neal or Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeaux, I'd do it. But I don't think that's going to happen this year. So I think Jacksonville just needs to take Evan Neal. And then the line should go with Hutchinson. And then, like I said with the Texans, if the Texans obviously aren't going to take a quarterback at 3. So it's going to be kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of people throwing Kyle Hamilton to them at 3, which is interesting. Like, I love the safety position as much as anyone. A lot of my favorite players have been safety. Deion Grant, Eric Berry. Love Kevin Byard. I mean, among a ton of other people, I love the safety position. But with the needs the Texans have, I like Hamilton as a personality and as a locker room guy better than, say, a Kayvon Thibodeaux. Like, I have questions. After that interview he did on Fox Sports, I have real questions about Thibodeaux. And his mentality and his ability to interact with his teammates in a positive way. Or certain teammates in a positive way. I mean, that interview where he basically said that a University of Alabama degree means nothing. That Alabama wasn't, or because of Oregon's partnerships with Nike, like they're a global brand. I'm like, Alabama has a huge sponsorship deal with Nike. Yeah, they're not like directly partnered with Nike like Oregon in a lot of ways, but saying that like Alabama football at this point, like the University of Alabama, like they're definitely nationally, but I would argue like in a football sense, like that's a global, borderline global brand. It's not like Oregon football is bigger than and more recognizable than Alabama football. Like, get over yourself. But I don't know. That was bizarre. Like, you should go look up the clip. I think if you type in Kayvon Thibodeaux, Joel Klatt, I think it should be like the first result, and it's, man, if I was a team in the southeastern United States, I would not touch Thibodeau. Because I'd be worried about my fan base getting upset. I know that shouldn't play into your mindset if you're drafting people, but like there is something to be said about like someone's mentality and their personality affecting their professional life. And Thibodeau, what he did there, absolutely has the ability, especially if it's a continued pattern of behavior, or if it's really a window into his real mindset. That is a huge, like, to me, that could really harm your team building process, especially as many players come from the Southeastern Conference, Texas, and other parts of the country that are, or like, and just even like poorer parts of the country. Because to be honest, I actually feel like that was a really big like socioeconomic just smackdown that he put on basically poor regions of the U.S. just beyond, saying Alabama. Because he was talking about the West Coast. So, anyway, talked about Detroit, which, of course, Detroit being at number 2, because they're going to have a very interesting decision to make. Of course, the New York teams, I talked about the Giants, the Jets. Both the Giants and the Jets have 2 first-round picks that are in the top 10, I believe. Yeah. So, or top 12. I think, yeah, top 10. So, they have the ability to really flip, I say flip the fortunes of the franchise, like, sitting the first time the Jets or Giants have had multiple first round picks, and it's not the first time the Giants have had like multiple like top 17 picks. And here they are. Just a couple years later. It's like 3 drafts later, I think. So the Jets have picks 4 and 7. They have the ability to get some really good players here because right now I have them going with Ekwonu at 4, and my number 7 prospect is, sorry, I'm off the top of my head. I don't have my stuff pulled up because I wasn't going to go super deep down this. But, well, let me just say a few players that are in that range would be, for me at least, Charles Cross, who I've already got him going Ekwonu, so that's off the board. Or I wouldn't take 2 offensive linemen if I was the Jets. Some people might not even take 1. I think Ekwonu's a perfect grab because at the very least, you could even start him off at guard and then kick him out to tackle if, whenever George Fant's contract's up. But having him and Mekhi Becton on the same line, and potentially even on the same side of a line, my God, especially for your run game, good night. I mean, seriously. And if I'm looking at this class, if I'm the Jets, I know they drafted Michael Carter. I don't think that precludes them from drafting a running back in the middle rounds of this draft. And I'm just sitting here and I'm looking at guys like Breece Hall, out of Iowa State. You've got Kenneth Walker of Michigan State. I'm trying to think, who's the other guy I have in my top 3 right now? Because there's kind of like, to me, there's like a top 3 and there's a little bit of a drop for the next group. Oh, his name is right. Oh, Isaiah Spiller of A&M. If you put Spiller behind those guys, man, whew. Or if you wanted to get someone with electric speed, I think Kyron Williams is going out of Notre Dame is going to have a really good 40 time, and I really liked him in college. He's got like breakaway potential, um, but he's not as thick as those other guys. But you pair him with a Michael Carter, they're not super dissimilar in like size and whatnot, but it would give you someone to share the load with. But Isaiah Spiller is so complete as a running back, and I think out of him, Walker, and Hall, he's got the most pop. So I really like him. I think that'd be great. Back to like what I was saying with like the Jets though, as I got off on the idea of Aquanu and Becton. You get a guy like Aquanu, and then maybe you're able to get a corner with your second pick. One of Ahmad Snacks Gardner or Derek Stingley for your secondary. Maybe Kyle Hamilton falls and you're able to draft him at 7. But then again, you've already kind of done that with Jamal Adams, so I don't know. Maybe you don't want to do that again because you're not going to be willing to pay that contract that Kyle Hamilton, I'm going to say, is going to end up earning. And heck, they might not even pay Marcus May after franchising him last year. Who they drafted in the second round of the same draft they drafted Jamal Adams, by the way. Imagine like spending first and second round picks on safeties and then them both being gone within the span of a year. It just seems like that's waste right there, because you properly develop them and then you're not going to pay them, like either of them. Now the Jamal Adams trade has worked out swimmingly. You've got 2 first-round picks in the top 10 because of that right now. Part of it's because of your own injury luck and mismanagement, but the other part of it is you traded Jamal Adams and you're getting basically the same pick that you drafted him with in a way, or similar value, because he was the number 6 pick. You got the number 7th pick out of that trade. That's not garbage by any means. And then for the Giants, you've got 5 and I believe 9, 10. Another thing the Jets could do with their second first-round pick is go receiver. Or do the Jets have the 10th pick? Maybe the Giants have 5 and 7 or 5 and 8. Man, I should have that memorized by now. But the Jets could also go with like Drake London, or I had Jamison Williams as a top 10 guy. I had him as my number 1 receiver before the injury. He's probably not going to go there now. But Treylon Burks, I've seen his name up there. I've seen Garrett Wilson. Some people have him as the first guy off the board at the 10th spot. That would be interesting. I think so. The Jets have a lot of options, a lot of good options with that second pick. I would go Aquanu if he's on the board at 4, though. For the Giants, you've got. I think they could improve their linebacker group, which so could the Jets, but I don't think that's as important as some other things for them. You've got Nakobe Dean and Devin Lloyd, who maybe that's at the peak of their range. I don't like them as much as, say, a Micah Parsons last year. And from an athletic standpoint, not quite as much as a Jamin Davis. And I loved last year's linebacker class. And I think this is another great linebacker class. But I would say like Charles Cross should probably be on their radar. I see him all over the place. Some people have him as like a top 5, top 7 player, and then other people have him in the 20s. So he's going to have an interesting volatile range, it looks like. Um, another candidate for them in there would be like if Kevon, and this is another thing I didn't even mention. Thibodeau's kind of slid down a few people's draft boards, have him out of their top 5 prospects now, like or somewhere between like 4 and 7, 4 and 8. Thibodeau could be available with at both of the Jets selections in the draft. So that could be interesting. If they could walk away with like a Kwonu and Thibodeau, they'd win the draft, or at least they'd win the first round from a talent standpoint specifically. The Giants, like I said, Charles Cross, Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean. Everybody needs corners, so obviously Stingley, Gardner, like you can't have too many of those guys in my opinion. Kyle Hamilton would fit. I think the Giants could take anyone on the defensive side of the ball, and it would, look smart as far as I'm concerned. And offensively speaking, otherwise you're only you're drafting offensive line there. I think if Cross is on the board and he's fits the value range, you take him. If not, I'd rather go by my board than by need. And there's also the possibility for the Jets and Giants trading down with one of their selections, or like their second selection, for a team that maybe is wanting to move up ahead of like Washington potentially for a quarterback. Because I know Atlanta's at 8. And that's like Carolina needs a quarterback. They're not drafting a quarterback at 6. They're trading down if they're drafting a quarterback, I have a feeling. Atlanta at 8, I feel like is the highest that a team might draft a quarterback. And I'm not super convinced of that. Some other storylines, because I'm about to get into quarterbacks here in a second, but I wanted to run through some other teams. Cleveland's going to be interesting this offseason. Baker's got his... Baker has his rehab that he's got to do for his non-throwing shoulder. I think there could be some... It's going to be interesting what they do, because I think they need to draft a receiver in the first round. Draft a young receiver. And they could easily get Garrett Wilson with their pick. I believe they're at 13. It's 12 or 13 is their first round pick. Garrett Wilson would be good. But any of these guys, it just depends on what kind of receiver they want. Drake London would be interesting because of his physicality. You've got a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones who you could continue to develop as like a deep threat option. And London's got more speed than I think some people give him credit for. He's just not. It takes him a little while to get up. He's got more build-up speed, but he's 6'5". He's physical, and he gives Baker a guy that he can. I think he will really trust throwing the ball up to in some tighter window thing or some tighter window throws, because those aren't 50-50 balls with Drake London. Against most defenders, that's going to be like a 70-30. If not better. Like London to me is a better version of Mike Williams. He's not quite as thick, although he could put on some more weight and muscle. But he's quicker than Mike. I think he'll run like a faster 40 than Mike. Not that 40s are everything, but he's a more fluid mover than Mike. And he doesn't have Mike's like back concerns. Yeah, he's coming off off a broken ankle, but that's not a career killer anymore. But now that I think about it, he might not be able to run at the combine, so we might not know his 40 time, but he plays plenty fast on the field. and it's going to be interesting. Like, do the Browns bring like Jadeveon Clowney back? Um, do they keep Jarvis Landry? Because if they keep Jarvis Landry, there's your possession guy. Maybe you go for a more explosive, deep threat type player. But Jameson Williams getting hurt, I mean, but he probably wouldn't have been around by that pick anyway. I could see a team late in the first round, including the Titans, if Williams somehow keeps falling, because some people think he's going to fall to the very end of the first round because of how talented this class is. The Titans have done a really good job of snagging up guys who fell later than people expected because of injury concerns. Harold Landry in the second round back in 2018. Jeffrey Simmons in 2019. And heck, even to some degree, I think A.J. Brown a little bit because of a knee injury he had at one point, I think is one of the reasons Brown slid. And Caleb Farley last year. Caleb Farley when he ended up having to have that back procedure, a lot of people were like, or had him like borderline top 5. Like, a lot of people had him as their top corner. Not Horn, not Surtain. A lot of people were on the Farley train. And yeah, he tore his ACL during the season, but Farley was looking pretty good. So we'll see how he recovers from that. But the Titans have been willing to take chances on stuff on those guys, and it's in a lot of cases it's paid off. So if Williams passes medicals, and I mean ACLs just aren't it's not career killer anymore, especially for young guys. Because I mean that's what happened to Jeffrey Simmons. He tore his ACL during the preparing for the NFL Combine. It was like the very beginning of February, I think, that he got hurt. And he was back, and he was making an impact in the or down the stretch, the end of the season, and what came up huge in the playoffs. He was one of the big reasons the Titans defense was able to get all those fourth down stops against the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs. So, and I mean, look at him. Like, look at how dominant he was in that game against Cincinnati. So, anyway, I think it's going to be interesting. Of course, Cincinnati coming off of their Super Bowl run, one of their best players on their defense, Jesse Bates, is his rookie contract is up. Do they franchise it? I think he gets franchised. It's only $12 million. It's only $12 million for safety. That's a no-brainer because Bates is worth that money. I want to say he turned down an extension coming into this year that was like 3 years, $36 million. So, I would say and heck, they might not even franchise him because they might come to an extension agreement before then. But it depends. I wonder what he would ask. If it gets to that last day and there's not an extension done, you franchise him because he's the best free agent you've got. But the Bengals have got to improve their offensive line. That's a big offseason storyline. Can they improve their offensive line? Seems like a theme for a lot of the teams in that region. Chicago got to improve, or in the Midwest, they got to improve their O-line. Cincinnati's got to improve their O-line. Cleveland had, and then it seemed like it kind of backslid a little this year. So we'll see. But I think some of that was because of health. Indianapolis's offensive line, because of injuries last year, wasn't itself for stretches of the season. We'll see if any moves happen there at the like Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly spots. So I've got a about 30 minutes here, I would say. So let's get into my quarterback rankings. That shouldn't take stupid long. So we are looking at 2020 draft. Okay. Or 2022. So, and by the time we get past the combine, I'm hoping to have like some graphics for this kind of stuff. So, my and this is how I'm going to break down my quarterback grades in. I'm going to break them down by my tape grade on them based on their college tape. And then I'll give like some caveats because I think they fall into different categories. So for starters, my highest tape grade is Kenny Pickett of Pitt. If you watch him play, he's clearly, in my opinion, the best quarterback in the class. I don't think he has any negative traits. The one thing you could say is he doesn't sit, or if there is one negative trait, maybe you could point out, it's that he has a tendency to not sit in the pocket and to eject from the pocket too early, like drift out of the pocket instead of just standing there. And let his guys come back and find windows rather than him trying to create windows when guys aren't necessarily initially open. He's great at getting through progressions. And I think some of his drifting, especially this last year, a lot of that was a product of the fact that Pittsburgh's offensive line has gotten better each year that he's been there, but there were times where it was really bad. So, but that's a habit that can be coached up. Patrick Mahomes, his tape in 27, his tape from Texas Tech was all over the place. You would watch his tape and his feet wouldn't be set. He'd leave like a clean pocket, or he'd leave the pocket too early. Maybe it was going to eventually collapse, but he'd leave too early. Like, he'd basically be fading backward, adding yards to throws, basically. Throwing off platform. The whole process would be wrong. Yet the throw is perfect, and the receiver catches it, and you're like, oh, he can't. Like, this can't. This is, that's great and all, but. And then over and over again, he just keeps getting, quality results. And at some point, it's like, okay, this guy's got mad talent. Because this guy breaks all the rules and wins. Now, the team's record wasn't great. That wasn't his fault, though. Like, he was keeping them in games that, they had no business, being within, 2 or 3 touchdowns. They'd put up 35, 42 points. Defense would allow, 60. But, he's doing his job. But that causes you to change how you evaluate quarterbacks. Because, the next year you've got Josh Allen. And Allen had some similar issues. And he was playing with less talented players and was more raw than Mahomes. But look at what he's been molded into. So you look at those things, and I see that with Kenny. Difference between Kenny Pickett is he doesn't have their crazy arm talent. And he's not as athletic as those guys, I would say. Now, that doesn't mean he's not athletic. Kenny's actually got some pretty good wheels, and he might be maybe as quick as Mahomes. And he's really good at making plays off extension, but he doesn't have as good an arm. And part of that is this small hand size. And this is the thing when it comes to tape grade. He's my number one guy. I am worried about, I know I've said this earlier in the week. I'm concerned about his hand size. And I don't ever utter that phrase. So, I mean, we'll see. At the college level, it wasn't a problem, but the ball was smaller. And I think anyone who says that, hand size is just something that you should always ignore, I think they're wrong, because I can tell you from my own experience, which my hands are smaller than Kenny Pickett's, and I'm just smaller than Kenny Pickett's in general. Like, to some degree, size does matter. Like, there's a reason the further you get away from 6 foot in either direction, or should I say, the further you get from 6 foot going south, the less players there are of note in the NFL. Same with the NBA too. But and it actually starts even taller than 6 feet, really there. And in the NFL, like, it's a real outlier for guys to be incredible at skill positions when they're like taller than like 6'3", 6'4". And at the quarterback position even, once you get taller than like 6'5", there's not a lot of track record for great success. But if you get too much below like if you get below 6 foot, like, you've got Russell Wilson right now, a little bit of Kyler Murray, and that's about it. And Doug Flutie, but even that, like, that's not, Doug Flutie wasn't, he's not a Hall of Famer. So, now Kenny Pickett height-wise, he's got solid measurables, but, I mean, those hands are a little small. And I think that's going to affect his ability in inclement weather, or it can. We will see, but it looked like it did down at the Senior Bowl in the rain. Because what that does, it affects your ability to have a firm grip on the football. And at some point even, like, as your hands get smaller, because of that surface area, you're potentially going to, with that kind of grip, push the ball out of your hands even. So it makes it to where you can't grip it as tight. And that keeps you from being able to put velocity and spin on your throws. So, and just, control the football in general when running around. So I don't know. That's a little bit of a question mark. But tape-wise, I love him. And he's definitely the number one quarterback from a ability to do everything with the brain, and on tape, very consistent. And really accurate to all 3 levels of the field, even while on the move. Obviously, he rolls to his left, he runs more because, and that's pretty much the case with any right-handed QB. If they're rolling to their left, if the throw's not obvious there, they're pretty much going to run. Which is wise, as far as I'm concerned. Like, your body mechanics, it's why I don't love coaches rolling quarterbacks out to the opposite side, like for right-handers left or left-handers or lefties to the right. I don't love those play calls, especially like on do-or-die downs, because I think you're putting them in a tougher situation. I'd rather them choose to bail the pocket and create than be kind of forced into those scenarios, but especially going to the left, because it's so hard to get stuff lined up right when you're rolling left and you're having to kind of twist your body back and throw. You're having to fight your own body a lot more. So Kenny's my number one. My number 2 quarterback is Sam Howell. I love Sam Howell. I'm going to stand firm on him. His tape is not as consistently good as Kenny's from this past season. Howell's first 2 seasons were awesome, but he had a plethora of weapons at his disposal, and his offensive line played better than it did this year. And he had a elite college deep threat Dimey Brown to throw to his first 2 years. He had a great running back room in Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, who both those guys were capable receivers, even down the sideline on wheel routes. His tight end actually played better. Like his starting tight end this year was not as good as he was in 2020, in my opinion. It seemed like he decided his hands were gonna. He just. It's like his hands rating regressed randomly, or whatever, if we're talking in Madden terms. And he lost multiple receivers. Like he lost Daz Newsome. I do think I think his name's Downs. Really speedy guy is actually better than Newsome. Like he's definitely more dynamic. But Downs was like their number 4 receiver, I think. Last season, he was their number 1 guy this year. That's a lot of turnover. You lose, I think, 5 of your top 7 pass catchers. And 2, 1,000+ yard running backs, and I think like both had like over 1,500 or had like 1,500 total yards of offense apiece. I think they combined for like 3,000 yards of total offense, which is, that's a lot of production and a lot of attention taken away. What Howell did do this year was turn into a borderline dynamic runner. He's not like Lamar Jackson or anything, but he's got really good burst, like really good speed, compared to what I think a lot of people thought. And he's got pop to his, like he's tough. Like he's short, he's built thick. He's like 6'1", 220. But he's stout and he's tough. He had a few weird reads. Like he has some bad decisions on tape. Every quarterback has a few bad decisions on tape. To me, I'd argue he's got the best deep ball in the class. Doesn't mean he's got the best arm, but I think he's got a great arm. But his ball placement, like the touch he gets on his deep ball, I think is great. I'll get into a couple other guys, or I'll get to a couple other guys who I think like have better arm talent, or they have better pop, but I don't know if their ability to use that talent is better, at least at this stage. My number 3 quarterback on tape grades, and to say with Howell is maybe my favorite quarterback. Like it was Kenny, or coming into like this process, man, I fell in love with Howell watching his tape. There is a fiery competitor there, and same with Pickett. Like I love these guys. I think they can be great like leader type players. So I think the 4 is really good with Kenny Pickett. Is another thing. Like at the war, like even if Kenny Pickett busts, he's not going to bust like Josh Rosen. He's not going to bust like a lot of other quarterbacks will. A bust Kenny Pickett is probably a 10-year veteran backup who starts a lot of games. It is my thing. Like, I don't think there's any. I think Kenny Pickett will be a career, like, unless his hand size really is that big of a problem. I think you're looking at a guy who very well, this guy's going to bust out as people are arguing still that he's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league, you know, by the time he reaches like the 10-year mark. But I think his ceiling is, in my opinion, is Joe Burrow-esque. I see a lot of Joe Burrow in him. I don't think he's as good as Burrow. I'm not saying that. But there's a lot of stuff I see that reminds me of Burrow. Play extension, confidence, competitiveness. There, to me, Kenny has a lot of that it factor. And Howell. If I was comping like Howell to anyone, I'm trying to think of a quarterback with his build. It's kind of interesting. Maybe there's some Tyrod Taylor to Howell, if I could put it that way. Like the arm, the deep ball, his ability in the RPO game, and he's got some good athletic traits. Like he's strong, he's tough. But like ceiling for Howell, I don't think like Tyrod Taylor's his floor or anything. Because I think Howell's floor is like he could bust hard for sure. I don't think that's likely. There's some things about Howell that kind of remind me of like his ability running the ball and with mobility reminds me of Jake Locker. But he is much more accurate than Jake Locker. And his fastball is not quite as hard as Locker, but he's got more touch. Like it's really hard for me to. I'm really struggling to find a good comp for Howell at the moment. My number 3 guy's Carson Strong out of Nevada. The big caveat with him is medical. He's had some knee issues. Like he's had to have basically the cartilage in his knees worn down, and he's had to have cadaver tissue put in. Which that's apparently the success rate on that is relatively high, or maybe not even relatively. It's just like high likelihood of success that the body takes it. But if the body rejects it, that's big because you could see on his tape this past year, like his 2020 season was outstanding. And he's not like super athletic, like he's not super mobile, even if this takes. He's not like super slow or anything, but like he's limited than most of the quarterbacks you're seeing nowadays because quarterbacks are becoming more and more athletic. He's more in that Mac Jones category of mobility, but he knows how to be functionally athletic. He knows he's got great pocket sense. He's got like sensing pressure, maneuvering in the pocket, creating, moving out of danger long enough to either throw the ball away or find some kind of way to not make a negative play. Like Strong's really good at that. If Strong's knee's good, he might have the best arm talent in the class. Like if we're gonna balance arm strength, like I'd say his arm is stronger when he's at 100%. He's got a cannon. I'd say it's better than Howell's. And he's got he's got pretty good touch. He can miss high a little bit, but I think once again that has to do with some of the stuff with his knee. Because like as this season went along, he started off the year looking great, and by the end of the year, the last few games of the year, you could see that he was being really careful, not planting as strong. Like he wasn't getting everything into his throws, um, and it was also showing up in his movement. Like and that's a big thing. There's some guys like uh, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name, but that franchise guy here on YouTube, that he's got him as his number one tape grade. Like he's his highest graded quarterback. He's just the injury red flag. And I mean, this is a big one because it's kind of like because I'll group these guys into to the categories I kind of put them in. Once I get through kind of like the top guys, like the most important names to know. Um, um, Strong's really good at getting through his progressions, like Pickett. That's one thing Howell can still improve on. And Howell struggle. Just to pop back on Howell real quick, I'm sorry. Howell did struggle at the Senior Bowl with kind of verbiage and doing like the pro style, uh, getting plays called, and making certain adjustments for himself, and kind of struggled getting used to being under center, which that can be an issue for some teams, but it's not an issue for every team. Now, it's not as big an issue for, it's not as widespread an issue anymore, because some teams do so much stuff out of shotgun anyway. Like if he was playing in Buffalo, that wouldn't be an issue at all. Kansas City, not an issue at all. Heck, the way Phillies played with Jalen Hurts, it wouldn't be an issue. There are a lot of teams where that's not that big a problem. Cincinnati, plays a ton out of shotgun. So Strong had a solid group of weapons actually. His top receiver and tight end have been kind of rising up draft boards. I think they could both go in round 3. Personally, they're going to go round 3, round 4. I think basically guaranteed. I think his tight end could slip into round 3. This receiver class, once you get past the first round guys, I think there's a lot of guys who could kind of move and slide around. Because I think there's a lot more talent down the board than people initially realized with this class. Especially with guys like Wan'Dale Robinson. You've got, I think it's Jalen Tolbert of South Alabama. Dubes of Nevada. I'm trying to remember who the Boise State receiver is. Is it Shafir? Who's Ritter's guy from Cincinnati, their top receiver. Pierce from Cincinnati's looks like a really good candidate to be as a guy to draft in the 3rd round. I like his ball skills. And I'm leaving out a couple names. So don't, sacrifice me or anything if I didn't name your favorite guy. Strong really works through his progressions well, moves well in the pocket, has great sense. And I love guys who sense pressure well. I actually think Pickett senses pressure better than him. It seems like when he's bailing from the pocket early. I think that has less to do with him fearing pressure and more to do with just maybe a few bad habits or just liking to get out on the move. Because to me, I saw a lot of tape where he did sense pressure really well. I'll say that, like I said, Strong's arm talent, if his knee's good, is as good as anybody. And he might be the most, if his tape is really good. I'd say his tape from the last 2 years is probably better, or especially this past year was probably better than Howell's. There's just things that I fall in love with Howell that have him my number 2. But I mean, like, we're splitting hairs here. I think if it wasn't for Strong's knee issues, I think a lot of people would just have him as their number 1 quarterback right now, personally. For number 4, this one's tough because these guys I'll say 4 or 5. I have the same grade on them. So you put them whichever order you like them. And I've got Willis and Corral neck and neck. I think Corral has the higher floor. Willis obviously has the higher ceiling. So I'll go with Corral first, because I think Corral. I think I think New Orleans would draft Corral. I think New Orleans drafts Corral if he's there right now. So I'm not in love with Matt Corral's arm. Some people, like, there are videos of, like, with people like the strongest arm or the best arm in college football. I don't agree with that. Now, he has really great zip in the short to intermediate game. Like in that range, his arm looks great. When he gets downfield, it's not as good. Oh, I gotta wrap this up. The best way I could put Corral is, imagine if Jalen Hurts was quicker. Or imagine if Jalen Hurts' brain moved quicker. He wasn't a one-read quarterback. And he was braver. But I gotta go. I guess I'll finish this up later. They got here earlier than I anticipated.